Hello, Taurus. Welcome in. I'm really glad you're here with me today. Before we get into these cards, just give yourself a second to settle in. Relax your shoulders. Maybe take one slow breath and allow yourself to receive whatever feels meant for you in this moment. Take what resonates and leave the rest. Okay, Taurus. The Knight of Cups is coming out first, and I immediately feel like there was something about this person that made you believe this could become real. Maybe it wasn't only what they said. It could have been the way they looked at you, the attention they gave you, the little things they remembered, or the effort they seemed willing to make when the two of you were together. I feel like there were moments when you genuinely thought, okay, this is going somewhere. And with the Ace of Cups sitting beside that Knight of Cups, there may have been such a beautiful emotional opening here. Something felt fresh, something felt hopeful. Perhaps you weren't even trying to fall this deeply into it at first. You may have simply enjoyed being around this person, enjoyed the conversations, enjoyed how naturally the energy seemed to move between you. But somewhere along the way, Taurus, your heart started imagining more. I keep sensing that this person gave you enough to believe there was something worth building. Maybe they talked about things the two of you could do together later. Maybe they made plans ahead of time. Maybe there were affectionate messages, meaningful conversations, thoughtful gestures. Whatever form it took, it didn't feel completely casual to you. And then I have the Six of Cups. Oh, this feels tender. There's something about certain moments with this person that may still live very clearly in your memory. A particular conversation, a night together, something they said when their guard was down. Maybe even something incredibly ordinary that somehow felt intimate because it was shared with them. You may look back and wonder how something that felt so natural could become so confusing, because here comes the Two of Pentacles. Yeah. This is where I feel the rhythm changing. It's almost like you started meeting two different versions of the same person. When they were present, they were present. They could make you feel chosen, wanted, cared for. You may have felt like there was no possible way somebody could behave this way unless they genuinely had feelings. But when they pulled away, Taurus, they really pulled away. Maybe messages became inconsistent. Maybe plans became harder to make. Maybe you started noticing that you were waiting for them more than they were waiting for you. One moment, there was warmth, and the next, you were trying to figure out what happened. And I don't feel like you immediately gave up. You're Taurus. When something matters to you, you may give it time before deciding it cannot grow. You may have told yourself they were busy, overwhelmed, scared, or simply moving at a different pace. Perhaps you tried not to pressure the connection because what you experienced with them when things were good felt worth being patient for. But the moon is coming out, and this is where the emotional atmosphere becomes very different, because I feel like eventually you couldn't tell which version of this connection was real. Was it the beautiful version you experienced when this person was close to you, or was it the silence afterward? Was it what they told you? Or was it what they consistently showed you? And, Taurus, I feel like that question may have stayed with you much longer than you expected. There's also something interesting here, because I don't necessarily feel that everything you experienced with them was false. That would almost make this easier, wouldn't it? If you could simply say, none of it meant anything, maybe your heart could close the door and move forward. But these cards don't feel that simple. The Knight of Cups and Ace of Cups are still sitting here. The Six of Cups is still sitting here. There was something emotionally significant about this connection, at least from your perspective, and perhaps from theirs too. The confusion seems to come from what happened after those feelings began asking for something more substantial. And I keep looking back at this Two of Pentacles because there's a pattern starting to emerge. You may have spent more time adjusting to this person's changing energy than you realized. When they came closer, your heart opened again. When they stepped away, you tried to understand. When they returned, hope returned with them. Okay, and that makes me want to look much more closely at what you were actually waiting for here. because underneath all of these beautiful moments, I feel like there was one thing Taurus needed more than anything else. And somehow, that was the one thing this connection kept leaving just out of reach. The King of Pentacles is sitting here with such a different energy because I feel like this is what your heart was actually reaching for. Not intensity for the sake of intensity, not beautiful words that disappeared by morning. You wanted something you could trust, something that could exist outside of those magical moments when everything between you felt perfect. And Taurus, I keep sensing that you were willing to be patient with this person because you weren't expecting perfection. You may have understood that people have complicated lives, fears, responsibilities, and things they're still working through. You weren't necessarily asking them to have everything figured out. You just wanted to feel that the two of you were moving in the same direction. The Seven of Pentacles comes out, and, yeah, there's so much patience here. I can almost feel you looking at this connection and thinking, maybe it just needs more time. Maybe you thought, if you didn't push too hard, this person would eventually become comfortable enough to move closer. Maybe you gave them space when they needed space. Perhaps you tried to understand their silence instead of immediately taking it personally. There's an energy here of investing emotionally and waiting to see whether what you were nurturing would finally become something solid. But I feel like there came a point where patience started becoming waiting. And those are not always the same thing. The Two of Pentacles reversed feels important because something about this arrangement may have become exhausting. You may have been adjusting yourself around their availability without even realizing how much energy it was taking from you. Their schedule, their mood, their willingness to communicate, their readiness to talk about what this actually was. It feels like they had the ability to move the connection closer or farther away, while you were left responding to whatever version of them showed up. That can slowly make someone feel powerless. And with the Nine of Swords coming through, I feel like there may have been nights when your mind became much louder than your heart. You could have replayed conversations, reread messages, wondered whether you said too much or not enough. Maybe you questioned whether asking for clarity would somehow push them farther away. Oh my God, Taurus! That's such an uncomfortable place to live emotionally, because you shouldn't have to constantly calculate how much of yourself is safe to reveal to somebody you're trying to build something real with. Perhaps you even became quieter about your own needs, not because those needs disappeared, but because part of you wanted to preserve the connection. And here comes the devil. Okay, this feels less like love disappearing and more like becoming attached to possibility. You had seen enough of what this person could be with you that walking away from what they weren't giving became incredibly difficult. Every beautiful moment became evidence that maybe the stable version of this connection was still somewhere ahead of you. So you waited a little longer. You gave another chance. You allowed another return. And every time they came back with warmth, attention, or vulnerability, something inside you may have thought, there you are, that's the person I knew was in there. But Taurus, I feel like something has been changing inside you through all of this. The King of Pentacles doesn't feel like someone who wants to keep guessing forever. There's a quiet realization developing here that consistency cannot be created by one person carrying enough patience for two. You can understand someone and still need more from them. You can have compassion for their circumstances and still notice that your needs aren't being met. You can love what something could become and eventually have to look at what it actually is. And I think that distinction matters deeply here, because the more I sit with these cards, the more I feel like the instability wasn't happening because this person saw nothing valuable in you. There's something much stranger underneath their behavior. Something about the kind of stability you naturally bring seems to touch a place in them that they may not know how to handle, and I want to stay with that feeling for a moment, because what looks like distance on the surface may be connected to something they've been trying very hard not to face within themselves. The King of Swords is coming through, and there's something almost guarded about the way this person processes emotion. I feel like when feelings become intense, instead of moving deeper into their heart, they move straight into their head. They analyze, they question, they imagine everything that could go wrong. And perhaps that's why their behavior has felt so difficult to understand, because what they feel and what they allow themselves to do with those feelings may be two completely different things. There's something about you, Taurus, that feels very real to this person. You may represent a kind of steadiness they're not accustomed to receiving. With you, perhaps they could imagine ordinary things that somehow felt bigger than grand romantic gestures. Waking up beside someone, having routines together, knowing where they belong at the end of the day, building something that doesn't disappear the moment life becomes complicated. And that's where the Hierophant reversed comes in. Okay, I feel like commitment itself may bring something uncomfortable to the surface for this person. Not necessarily because they don't desire closeness, but because closeness asks something from them. It asks them to be seen consistently. It asks them to stay present when things become emotionally vulnerable. It asks them to stop keeping one foot near the exit. Perhaps they've never learned how to feel safe inside something that serious. The Four of Swords is here, and I keep sensing that when this person becomes overwhelmed emotionally, their instinct may be to retreat. They go quiet. They disappear into themselves. They may tell themselves they just need time to think. But underneath that thinking, there could be something much more tender happening. Fear. Not necessarily fear of you, Taurus. Fear of what being deeply known by you could mean. Because when somebody becomes home, suddenly there's something meaningful to lose. And, oh, the Seven of Swords just came through. This feels like someone who keeps certain rooms inside themselves locked. You may have sensed that there were things they weren't telling you. Feelings they minimized, insecurities they covered with distance, perhaps even moments when you could feel them becoming emotionally close, and then suddenly changing the subject, pulling back, becoming busy, or acting as though what happened between you wasn't as significant as it felt. I don't necessarily feel like every hidden thing here is some dramatic secret. Some of it may simply be vulnerability they don't know how to express. They might have learned somewhere along the way that revealing too much gives another person the power to hurt them. So when you started seeing beyond the surface, they may have felt exposed. And Taurus, you probably weren't even trying to expose anything. You were just loving them closely enough to notice. The moon appearing here makes this feel even deeper. There are fears beneath fears with this person. Things they themselves may not completely understand. They may genuinely tell themselves that they need freedom, that the timing isn't right, that relationships are complicated, or that they don't know what they want. But I keep sensing that somewhere underneath those explanations is a much quieter question. What happens if I let this person all the way in? Because you don't feel temporary to them. That's the strange part. Your stability may have shown them what staying could actually look like. And instead of immediately relaxing into that, something inside them may have panicked. It feels like they can handle longing more easily than intimacy. They can miss you from a distance. They can think about you privately. They can remember what the two of you shared. But actually standing inside the connection and allowing themselves to be fully seen, that may be where the walls go up. And I need to be careful here, Taurus, because understanding why somebody runs does not automatically make their running easier for you to live with. Their fear can be real. Their feelings can be real. And your experience of being left confused can also be real. Those truths can exist beside each other. What's beginning to stand out to me is that we may be looking at somebody whose heart reaches toward you while their defenses keep pulling them backward. And that brings up a much more important question than whether they care, because eventually, feelings have to become something you can actually receive. The Six of Pentacles reversed is making me look at this connection from a very different angle, Taurus, because there comes a point where the question can't only be about what someone feels. There has to be a moment when you look at what is actually being exchanged between two people. And I feel like you may be reaching that moment. You could spend forever wondering whether this person misses you when you're apart. You could wonder whether they think about you late at night, whether they regret certain choices, whether they secretly imagine what life with you might have looked like. Perhaps some of those things are true, but none of them automatically create the relationship you need. The Four of Cups comes through, and there's almost this feeling of someone having something meaningful in front of them, but not knowing how to fully receive it. I feel like this person may recognize what you offer. They may even compare other connections to what they experienced with you. But recognition and participation are very different things. That distinction feels important, because you cannot build a relationship with someone's private feelings. You can only build with what they're willing and able to bring into the connection. And, okay, here comes the Knight of Cups again. That's interesting. There may still be emotion here. There may still be tenderness, attraction, longing, even romantic thoughts that this person hasn't completely released. I wouldn't be surprised if part of them wants to approach you emotionally, especially when they're missing the comfort they associated with you. But I feel like you've already experienced enough beautiful moments to know that a beautiful moment by itself doesn't answer the bigger question. What happens afterward? Does the communication remain? Does the effort continue? Does the vulnerability survive once the emotional intensity settles? That's where I feel Taurus becoming much more discerning. The Page of Swords reversed makes me feel like communication may have been one of the places where this connection became especially frustrating. Perhaps things were left unsaid. Maybe this person watched from a distance instead of speaking honestly. Maybe they tried to understand what you were doing without allowing you to understand what was happening inside them. There's something emotionally incomplete about that, and you may have spent too much time trying to translate silence. Taurus, silence can make you create answers for somebody who hasn't actually given you one. You may tell yourself they're afraid. You may tell yourself they need time. You may tell yourself they care, but don't know how to show it. Perhaps all of that contains some truth, but you still wake up inside the same uncertainty. The Five of Cups feels very quiet here. I don't necessarily see dramatic heartbreak as much as a realization settling in. This person may eventually look back and recognize what their fear cost them. There could be regret around opportunities they didn't take, conversations they avoided, or affection they didn't know how to sustain. But their regret cannot become your waiting room. Oh, Taurus, I feel like that's the sentence here. Their regret cannot become your waiting room. You are allowed to care about somebody and still stop organizing your emotional life around what they might someday become capable of giving you. You are allowed to believe their feelings were genuine without using those feelings as proof that you should keep accepting inconsistency. And perhaps that's the hardest kind of clarity, because it doesn't require turning this person into a villain. Maybe they did care. Maybe they still do. Maybe they truly were frightened by the depth of what they felt. But if fear continues making their decisions, you are still the one experiencing the consequences. I keep sensing something shifting in you as these cards sit here. It's less about getting one final answer from them, and more about recognizing what your own heart has been asking for all along. Because there's another question beginning to rise underneath this reading, Taurus, and it may be the one that changes everything. Not whether this person will finally choose you, but what happens when you decide you no longer need their choice to know what you deserve. The Empress is here, Taurus, and I love that she's showing up at this point in the reading, because the energy suddenly feels less focused on what this person is doing and much more focused on you. There's something softer here, but also stronger. It feels like you're remembering that love was never supposed to require you to abandon yourself in order to keep someone else close. I feel like you may have spent a long time believing patience was the loving thing to offer. And perhaps it was, for a while. You gave this person room to figure themselves out. You allowed them to move at their own pace. You tried to understand the things they couldn't explain. But the Empress doesn't feel like she's asking you to prove your love through endless waiting. She feels like she's asking you to recognize that what you give so naturally deserves somewhere safe to land. The Queen of Pentacles comes through beside her, and this feels so deeply Taurus to me. You want something you can live inside, not just something you can dream about. You want affection that exists on ordinary Tuesday mornings, not only during emotional reunions. You want somebody who remembers to call, who makes the plan, who follows through, who allows love to become part of everyday life. And maybe that sounds simple, but simple doesn't mean small. I feel like you're becoming much less interested in decoding someone and much more interested in experiencing something that doesn't require decoding at all. Justice is sitting here, and there's a quiet honesty entering this reading. You don't have to decide that this person was terrible. You don't have to rewrite every beautiful memory just because things didn't become what you hoped. You don't even have to deny that there may still be love somewhere between you. You can simply look at what happened honestly. What did you give? What did you receive? How often did you feel secure? How often did you have to wonder? How much of this connection existed in reality, and how much existed in the future you kept hoping the two of you would eventually reach? Yeah, those questions may feel uncomfortable, but they also feel freeing. Because judgment is coming through. And I feel like something inside you is waking up. Maybe you've been asking whether this person will realize what they lost. But perhaps the deeper awakening is yours. Perhaps you're realizing that being chosen by somebody else was never supposed to determine whether you were worthy of love. Their inability to meet you does not reduce what you brought. Their fear does not make your needs unreasonable. Their uncertainty does not mean you have to remain uncertain with them. And Taurus, this doesn't necessarily mean you wake up tomorrow and feel nothing. That's not how the heart works. You may still miss them. You may still remember certain moments and smile. You may still wonder occasionally whether things could have been different. But missing somebody and waiting for somebody are two different choices. Oh my God, the world. That feels beautiful here. I don't necessarily see this as slamming a door or declaring that you'll never speak to this person again. It feels more like closing an internal cycle. The version of you who kept waiting for the next message, the next return, the next sign that everything was finally changing, may be ready to put that weight down. And if this person ever does come toward you differently, perhaps you won't meet them from the same place anymore. You won't only ask, "Do you still love me?" You may ask, "What are you actually ready to build with me?" That changes everything, because love can be meaningful without becoming your destination. A connection can touch your life deeply without being something you have to hold forever. Sometimes, the gift is realizing what your heart truly needs after spending so long accepting almost enough. So, Taurus, wherever you are with this today, be gentle with yourself. You don't have to force an ending, and you don't have to force forgiveness. Just keep choosing what feels steady, reciprocal, honest, and peaceful. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and allowing me to read these cards with you. Take good care of your heart, Taurus, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.